Troops erected roadblocks today as a new Iraqi general took command of the city's security. Also, General David Petraeus is headed to Iraq as a newly installed allied commander. His U.S. reinforcements still are flowing in. While some Iraqis say the crackdown is coming too slowly after Saturday's massive market bombing, the government announced that 1,000 Iraqis died in acts of violence last week alone. At least 31 were killed today in Baghdad. Well, he didn't go to Iraq, so now he's going to trial. A court-martial has started for Lieutenant Ehren Watada. Army officers drawing national headlines for refusing to go to the front lines. Watada is being tried at Fort Lewis in Washington State, and CNN's Brian Todd is following that case for us from Washington, D.C. Brian?
Well, Don, until last June, Lieutenant Watada was considered an exemplary soldier. Now, as you mentioned, he's facing court-martial while his former unit with the 2nd Infantry Division is in Iraq. Watada is not with them because he refused to go, becoming the first commissioned officer in this war to purposely not deploy with his unit. The reason? His belief that the war is illegal. Today, Watada begins court-martial proceedings charged with failing to deploy with his unit, conduct unbecoming an officer, and contempt toward officials. That last charge for all the public statements he's made against the Bush administration since last June. And the judge has already ruled that his central defense, the illegality of the war, is a political question and cannot be ruled on by this military court. Then there's jury selection. He's got to face a panel of his peers, mostly Army lieutenants. We asked a prominent attorney who's tried several military cases about that equation.
It's highly improbable that this jury will include no one who's been there. So I think the jury selection is going to be an interesting exercise because obviously it's a concern if you have people who have had the actual experience to go to Iraq.
Now, if convicted, Watada could face about 4 years in a military prison. His family has already told CNN today they expect the trial to be done by Wednesday, Don.
All right, CNN's Brian Todd in our Washington Bureau. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Well, listen to this.
And as opposition to the war in Iraq intensifies among the American public, there's a stunning new development within the U.S. military. A court-martial began today for a U.S. Army officer who refused to ship out with his unit to Iraq. Let's get some details from our Brian Todd. Brian?
Well, First Lieutenant Ehren Watada took a stand about 7 months ago. He's now facing a jury likely to comprise young officers like himself in a case that even his family doesn't expect to go well for him. As his former unit takes casualties in Iraq, Army Lieutenant Ehren Watada puts his freedom on the line at Fort Lewis, Washington. Watada, considered an exemplary soldier until last June, when he became the first commissioned officer to refuse to go to Iraq. The reason?
It is my conclusion that the war is not only morally wrong, but it is in fact illegal.
Watada is not a so-called conscientious objector. While he believes the Iraq war is illegal, he did say he was willing to fight in Afghanistan. The Army declined, and Watada is now being court-martialed for failing to deploy with his unit, conduct unbecoming an officer, and contempt toward officials. That last charge for all the public statements he's made against the Bush administration since last June.
I felt betrayed by my leadership.
But the judge has already ruled that Watada's central defense, that the war is illegal, is a political question and can't be ruled on by this military court. Then there's the challenge of jury selection. By rule, it has to be a panel of peers, likely Army lieutenants.
It's highly improbable that this jury will include no one who's been there. So I think the jury selection is going to be an interesting exercise because obviously it's a concern if you have people who have had the actual experience to go to Iraq.
The case has made Watada a poster boy for the anti-war movement, some of whom are protesting near Fort Lewis as his trial gets underway. But Watada is said to be resented by some inside Fort Lewis, where he held a desk job until recently. His family tells CNN they expect this court-martial to be over by Thursday. If convicted, he could face 4 years in a military prison. Wolf?
We'll watch it together with you, Brian. Thanks very much. Let's go to New York and Jack.